Yeah, so that was a journey. When I first started, I remember I went down to Edward Jones and I wanted to buy a boat. I was 20, all my friends were going down to this reservoir and I only had enough money for a jet ski, but I thought, if I invest this money, I'm going to be able to buy a boat. So I went down to Edward Jones and I had about $4,500 to my name. That was everything I had. And I gave this to Edward Jones and they put it all in one stock. And within 3 years, I couldn't go out to dinner with what was left. And I learned a valuable lesson there to me. At the time, I was very upset because it was everything that I had. And I worked hard for that money. But I realized that nobody was going to look out for my money like I was. I had to be smarter. I had to know where my investments were going, and I couldn't rely on other people to do this for me.
You're listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, where you'll hear the stories and interviews of everyday millionaires. We'll unveil their decisions, their strategies, and their current portfolio allocation. Now to your hosts, Clark Sheffield and Jace Mattinson.
Welcome back to another episode of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. This is episode number 267. I wanted to address a couple of emails that we've received recently. One of them, people, or I guess a couple of them, but one in particular has been asking for us as the host, which at this point now is just me, to do an update on kind of our situation and some things we've learned. And then we get this request a lot. In fact, it's probably the most common request we get is, hey, what have you learned? What are the common themes of all these millionaires you've interviewed and everything like that? I think what we're going to do, and I will do an update on myself and probably wait to do that when I have another person to interview me, or maybe I can just walk through some of this later. Then also kind of address some of these lessons, because at any rate, it's interesting because there are some similarities between all these millionaires, but the one thing that is unique is, and one thing that we've really found out is there's just no one way to really do it. But we've got a bunch of data that we can get into and some interesting statistics and stuff. So definitely plan on doing something like that, probably at the beginning or end of the year here. 2022 or beginning of 2023, I'll put it on the calendar and make that happen, because I think we're probably up to almost a half dozen requests in the last 2 months on this topic, whether it be me doing an update and or getting the lessons that we've learned out there. So we did do a couple like this back in the day. I just can't remember. And now that we've got so many episodes, it's sometimes it's hard to search. But I'll try to go through and possibly email some of those back to those individuals and then do a new one, because I know we've got a lot of new listeners out there. So once again, appreciate you tuning in week after week. We'd love if you leave a review on either iTunes or Stitcher. Helps us continue to grow the show. So this week we got a great guest. His name is Brandon. He's an electrician. He also does motivational speaking after having a workplace accident. We have a great discussion with him about that and just really his career in general. His net worth around $2.6 million. $900,000 of that's in rental equity. It's about $380,000 in primary residence equity. And he's got $1.2 million in his 401k. $260,000 of that is in Roth. And this is probably one of the very few guests that we actually discuss. I should say one of the very few guests that we've had on that started his retirement accounts when he was a teenager, 18 years old. Started with 50 cents an hour and went up from there. So great discussion with Brandon this week. Great episode. Last week we had Bradley. He had net worth just over $1 million. Buy and hold type of guy. We discussed his journey about paying off debt, learning how to invest, and what to do when your employer didn't have investment options that you would prefer. Perhaps the biggest discussion we've had with anybody regarding a selection of a spouse or partner. So that's a great episode we had with Bradley. Let's get into this week's episode with Brandon.
Brandon, do you want to just give us a little bit of your background and what you're up to now?
Yeah, I'm an electrician. I just an everyday average person. I never went to high school or never went to college. I just kind of got a passion for finance, and I ended up trying a few businesses. One worked, one didn't. This has all been slow and sure. I really had no idea that I was doing as well as I was until basically I hit my first million. And even then, I didn't think I was doing that well. And when I look around at a lot of the other people that I considered wealthy, I was nowhere near their level. So I think, what makes my story or my situation unique is I'm nothing special. I'm just an average everyday person who likes to work and work hard, and I set goals and try to achieve them. So right now, I work as an electrician full time, and then I also have a motivational speaking business that I started up about 3 years ago. So I travel the country talking about a workplace accident that I had being an electrician, and that has boosted my income quite a bit. But that wasn't until the last 3 years that really took off.
Awesome. And what is your net worth today?
It's between 2.6 and 2.7. I didn't look to see what the market does on a daily basis, and I haven't updated my properties, but I would estimate it at 2.6 to 2.7.
Okay. And how is that broken up?
I've got about 900,000 in rental equity. I've got 380 in a primary house, in my personal house, and about 1.2 million in 401ks, of which 260,000 is in Roths.
Wow. So you've got quite the diversification. And I'm assuming you said you're an electrician, but you also have this other business. Does the money from the electrician, has that been primarily what's funded all of this up until, I guess, the last couple of years?
Yeah, until 3 years ago, I think my highest yearly income was about 74,000.
Wow.
My wife makes about the same. She makes a little more than me. She made about 80. She went part-time once we hit about 2 million. I just decided I was working quite a bit, and with 3 little kids, things were getting pretty hectic. So she cut back, work a little bit, and my wife works 8 to 2 so she can be home with the kids before and after school.
Awesome. So did you start contributing to retirement accounts when you first started working as an electrician back, I guess maybe that would have been when you were late teens?
Yeah, when I was 18, I hated school. When I was a senior in high school, I wanted to get done. So I graduated early. I had to have a high school diploma to apply for an apprenticeship. So I went down, graduated in January. I went and applied in 3 different cities for this apprenticeship. And I thought, I'll just move wherever I got in. So I got accepted into one of the apprenticeships. I was an 18-year-old kid with no experience. I started out at $9.26 an hour back in 1997. And I remember I filled out the 401k paperwork and I put 50 cents an hour in my 401k when I was 18. And then every time I got a raise, which was every 6 months to a year, I would put another 50 cents in. And I did that until I got to around $3 or $4 an hour. But the other thing is I had a pension through work, and it wasn't a pension where they pay you so much per month. It's more of we'll pay you a few dollars an hour into a 401k type plan. And so I had $1 an hour going in from that, and then I put in 50 cents. And as I progressed, by the time I was done, my pension was putting in, by the end of my 5 years of schooling, my pension was putting in about $4 an hour, and I was putting in about $3.
Wow. Do you happen to know how much you've contributed versus how much has been growth in those retirement accounts?
I don't. I couldn't tell you that. I knew, through some family experiences, I watched my family, my parents struggle, my grandparents struggle a little bit. And I just knew when I started at 18 working labor wise, when I was old, I didn't know if I was going to be able able to do this. So I thought, I've got to do this now. I didn't really even know what compound interest was. I just knew putting in your 401k was a good thing. And honestly, before I was making 926 as an apprentice electrician, I was working at the grocery store, mowing lawns, baling hay on the farm. So I had more money than I ever had. And that 50 cents, it didn't really affect me.
Interesting. So what is that all invested in? Is it mainly in index funds or mutual funds or?
I am a huge fan of Jack Bogle and Vanguard. I have about, through my employee 401k or pension, they're both lumped together. I have about 580,000 in those accounts through my employer. 80% of that is in the S&P 500, 20% is in small cap S&P fund. I'm sorry, a small cap Vanguard fund.
So it wasn't always that way in index funds, right? Or when you first started, what did you invest in?
Yeah, so that was a journey. When I first started, I remember I went down to Edward Jones and I wanted to buy a boat. I was 20. All my friends were going down to this reservoir, and I only had enough money for a jet ski. But I thought, if I invest this money, I'm going to be able to buy a boat. So I went down to Edward Jones, and I had about $4,500 to my name. That was everything I had. And I gave this to Edward Jones, and they put it all in one stock. And within 3 years, I couldn't go out to dinner with what was left. And I learned a valuable lesson there to me. At the time, I was very upset because it was everything that I had. And I worked hard for that money. But I realized that nobody was going to look out for my money like I was. I had to be smarter. I had to know where my investments were going, and I couldn't rely on other people to do this for me.
What was the stock, Brandon?
There was a local company. A lot of people in our area made a lot of money on it. I don't know the ticker symbol, but it was called McLeod USA. And basically the founder, he made hundreds of millions of dollars, and a lot of local people did too, but I just got in at the wrong time. I watched this thing go up, up, up. And I asked the lady at Edward Jones, I said, what do you think about this? And she said, yeah, I think it'll continue. And so I asked her if that's what I should invest in and if I wanted to make money. And she said, yeah, I think that'd be a good bet. And I look back at that knowing what I know now. In no way would I tell a 20-year-old kid to put everything he had in one stock.
Right.
But I did not know.
So do you still use Edward Jones, or do you use a different financial advisor?
No. So after that experience, I was pretty much done with the stock market. I didn't know anything. I just was in a target date fund at my work. I continued to put money in it. And I remember my wife got a job working as an intern for a property management company. And this guy, he told me once he was worth $50 million. And that was back in probably 2003, 2004, somewhere in there. And he'd have company parties and take us out in his limo. And the guy just would spend money like no other. And I got to talking to him, and I actually offered to go work for him for free. I just wanted to learn from him. And I thought, if he owned probably 1,000 apartment units, and I think he had somewhere around 100 houses. And my wife would come home and just tell me all this money he would spend. And we drove by his house, and I was like, I need to start buying houses. So I read the book, The Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and that was one of the most valuable books that I've ever read. And I just knew I had to get into real estate. So I was done with the stock market. I got done with my apprenticeship in around 2002, and there was a recession that hit. I don't remember what caused the recession in 2002, but I got laid off basically as soon as I got done with my schooling. I'm competing with people that have 10 and 15 years of experience, and I got laid off from my job, and there wasn't much going on construction-wise in the country. So I'm in a union, so I went out to Boston. Boston was booming. They had a lot of construction going on. And I just took a temporary worker almost. And I went out to Boston and I hit it big, in my opinion. That's what really catapulted me. I worked 7 days a week, 12-hour days. And at the time, I was making $4,000 a week as a 23-year-old kid. And I tried to save as much of that money as I could. And I did that for about 6 months. And I came home after that job ended and I bought my first rental house. I put 20,000 down. I also paid off with that money. I paid off the second mortgage on my house. I paid my truck off, and I took the remaining 20,000 and I put that down on my first rental property. I had no money other than that $20,000. The house needed new carpet. So I put the carpet on a credit card and I put new carpet in that house. And I remember my payment was six something. Let's call it $650, and I was renting it out for $950. When I got my security deposit, which I definitely shouldn't have done, I used that to pay off my credit card and my carpet, and then I had nothing else. And I knew I didn't want to pay 17 or 18% interest. So I slowly, over 3 months, I was able to put that deposit back. So when they moved out, I'd have the money to pay them back. And I was only making $300 a month on this house. And I kept thinking, this is going to take me forever to save this up because, I knew about PMI insurance. I knew I didn't want to pay extra PMI insurance. So I had to put down 20% on every house. And I would talk to this guy who had hundreds of houses and find these other property management companies that these guys were just buying houses like crazy. And I couldn't wrap my head around where they were getting this cash flow. But I just kept working my overtime and I kept trying to buy houses. And I had this friend and he always did very well with his money. He taught me more than probably anyone else. But I remember we went on spring break one year and we were down in Florida and he left his ATM receipt on the table. And I saw this guy had $25,000 in his checking account. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, I was 20 years old and I probably, I had a new truck, a jet ski, all of this before I got laid off. And I thought, I got to do things differently. And I started talking to him and I knew he had money. And he kind of taught me. But another house came up that I wanted to buy, but I didn't have the down payment. So I went to my friend and I said, hey, do you want to go in on this house with me? And he said, yeah, how much do you need? I said, well, I've got 12,000. If you put down 12,000, we can go buy this other house. And he's like, all right, let's do it. And we bought this house together. And the agreement was that I was going to manage it and he would get half the equity. And I just wanted properties. So we did that. And I made the mistake. I rented out to 5 college students and they had a fire out there one night and burnt the house down. So now I've got this insurance claim coming in and I'm thinking they're going to, I'm near my limits. They did $85,000 worth of damage to this $130,000 house. So I was right at the top of the limit. And my friend was building a house at the time and he's like, I don't want to deal with this. I can't deal with this. So I bought him out. By that time I had enough money saved up that I could buy him out. And now I'm dealing with the insurance company on my own. And I decided I'm going to do a lot of this work myself. I'm going to try to rehab this house, but I had never done a remodel before. And I went in there and, did a lot of the work myself and we got all done. I spent every dime that the insurance company gave me fixing this up and we got done and they did their final inspection. And I'm thinking, this is it. I made enough money, but this house is brand new and I've got a brand new house here. But I found out that they were withholding $20,000 until it was done. So now I've got everything paid for on this brand new remodeled house, and they handed me a $20,000 check that I had no idea I was getting. And so I was so excited. I called my wife and I said, we got this $20,000. So I called up my realtor and I told him, I'm like, hey, I want to buy another house. So I did. I went and bought another house. Well, I didn't have a lot of money other than this $20,000, but now I'm cash flowing between the two houses $700 a month. Plus, I had my credit card. And so we went into this third house and we started remodeling it. And I ended up working a whole bunch of overtime. I'd work 7 days a week, 10-hour days, and I was able to work enough overtime plus my $700 a month. And we did about a $15,000 remodel to this house, and I got it all fixed up. So now I've got three houses, and they're each making between $300 and $500 a month, and I'm cash flowing pretty good now. So I'm feeling good about this situation. And my banker that I was using, he called me about a year later, and he says to me, he says, hey, there's this property manager. He went to jail. Would you be interested in buying this house? The city's taking all of his stuff, and this is getting repoed. And I said to him, I said, well, how much is it? And he said, well, the tax value on it's about $120,000. Would you be interested in putting a sealed bid on it? And I said, I don't know what to bid on this thing. Have you seen it? And he said, well, I can't tell you what the other bids are, but if you bid 65,000, you'll probably get it. So I put in a bid of 65,000 and I got it. And I walked in there and this thing was it had cockroaches and fleas, but it was in a great neighborhood. And I went in there and we gutted that thing in about 4 to 5 weeks. I had 4 or 5 people that would help me, and I'd pay them between 15 and $20 an hour cash. And we totally remodeled this house in about 5 weeks. So now I've got these houses and I'm up to around $2,000 a month of cash flow. And my neighbor calls me and he says, hey, the lady across the street had a brain aneurysm. Do you interested in buying her fourplex? Well, now to buy this fourplex, I need 25% down, and I didn't have it. So I went and looked at this thing, and I was like, I got to have this thing. So there's no way I could let somebody else get this. And I just told my wife, I'm like, we have to buy this thing. So we're trying to scrape this money together, and I give this lady this story, I'm trying to get the money together, and it's going to take me a little bit of time, but I'll manage the property for you so that you don't have to do anything. And she was nice, and she strung it along for about 6 months until I could get some equity loans. I pulled equity out of my other 3 properties to buy this last one, and I bought that for $130,000. So now I'm cash flowing pretty good. I'm up to like $2,500 a month. And every time somebody moved out of one of those apartments, I'd go in there and I'd remodel it. And it'd take me a couple months to remodel it. And I'd pay for my I would pay for the remodel with my cash flow.
And at this point, Brandon, you're working as an electrician full time at this point. How much are you making from that?
I'm making about $50,000 to $60,000 as an electrician. And then every night after work, from the time I was 18 till I was about 22, when I started buying houses, I was doing side jobs. So I would go out and I would wire houses. I'd pick up shingles. I'd tear off roofs. I'd mow grass. Anything I could do to make a dollar, I was making those dollars. But I didn't know how to invest. And I remember, when 2008 came around, I had 25,000 saved up, and I had no idea what I was doing. And 2008 came around, the stock market crashed, and I'm watching all this stuff, and I'm seeing Walt Disney, Caterpillar. Let's see, what else did I buy? Walt Disney, Caterpillar, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. There might have been one other one, but I put $5,000 in each one of those stocks in 2008. And I thought, if these companies go under, we've got big problems. So I put $5,000 in each one. Well, as soon as I doubled it, I got out. So I made $25,000 in like a year. And I doubled that real quick. And that was my first exposure to any type of stock market investing through Edward Jones. and except through Edward Jones. And that kind of boosted my confidence a bit. I kind of thought I knew what I was doing at this point, but I still didn't trust anyone very much. So we took that $25,000 that we made and we bought a lot, paid cash for it, and we built a house. So things were going pretty good at that point, and we saved up around $100,000 pretty quick. And my wife came home to me one day and she said, these guys that I work with, she works at a bank, and she said, these guys that I work with, they're getting 15 and 20% on these mutual funds. We got to do something different because we had all this money sitting in our checking account or savings account. So I went to this other financial guy, and he says, yeah, we'll sign you up with all this stuff. And he did. And I told him no front loaded mutual funds. I didn't know a lot, but I knew what a front loaded mutual fund is. And I got my first statement, and I pulled out that statement and I put in the ticker symbols, and I see that I've got a 5.75% front load, and I'm mad. So I call this guy up, and I had just invested $250,000, everything that we had with him, and we pulled it all out and went into Vanguard. And I really didn't know what I was doing at Vanguard, but this guy came into my office and was telling me about Vanguard. So I put everything at Vanguard, and we just went into a target date or a life strategy fund at that point. And that was my first exposure to investing.
Wow. That's a pretty crazy story, Brandon.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. So just summing up what you just said and what you mentioned before we started recording the show, you didn't go to college. You mentioned you had a 2.2 high school GPA. All of this was just working hard, right? And grinding and working for dollars, as you just said.
Yeah, my friends used to call me, and I missed out a lot on early in life. And I think it took me a little longer to grow up because, a lot of my friends were going to college, they were partying, doing all this stuff. I couldn't do that. Every Friday and Saturday, I was working, 12 hours, and every night I was working, I'd go to work from 7 to 3:30, and then from 4:30 until 11, I would be doing side jobs or any type of hustle that I could to make extra money. But I didn't really know what I was doing with it. All I did with my extra money was, I had a truck. I always wanted this Chevy Silverado truck, and I paid that off in 2 years. I bought it used. It had 8,000 miles on it, but it was 1 year old when I got it. And I just knew I didn't want debt. Every time I signed up for one of those mortgages, I would lose 2 days of sleep. And I hated debt because I kept thinking, what if this house sits empty? What if they trash it? What if they don't pay rent? And any type of debt would give me severe anxiety. And I think a lot of that came from when I was a kid. My dad, I grew up on a farm, and I think that's where I got a lot of my work ethic, because my dad would work construction all day, and then he would farm at night and on the weekends. And I didn't know anybody that worked harder than him, and I always wanted to be like him. And I saw him struggle quite a bit out there on the farm in the 80s. He'd be out there working and making no money, losing money, working very hard on the farm, and it was all for nothing. And I just saw that, and I admired him for the hard work, but I saw him working for nothing, and I thought, I got to do something different with my life.
Wow, Brandon, it's pretty amazing, hearing this and seeing, you go through this and go on this journey. At this point, you got a net worth 2.6, 2.7. You've got a career that you love. You've got a pretty well diversified portfolio. How do you look at allocating the dollars now that come in to your household?
We have always tried to live within our means. So what I mean by that is my rental accounts are separate. My business account is separate. Everything that I bring in, I live on my paycheck and my wife's paycheck. So, for instance, right now my take-home pay is about $1,000 a week. And my wife's take-home pay, after all of her deductions, and she maxes out her 401k, is about $500 a week. And we live on the $1,500 a week. Now, that $1,500 a week is, we also save out of that. So we save $1,000 a month, plus we contribute to 529 accounts. It gets challenging sometimes. I think what really gave me my head start or made it possible for me to do this is I worked like no other from 18 to 32 or so. And the other part of this is when I was 32, I got in a terrible accident at work. I nearly died, and I just decided after I recovered that I wasn't going to work like that anymore. Because if I would have died that day, I was sacrificing my quality of life. I wasn't spending time with my wife. We had a brand new baby. I was working nonstop. And I just decided right then, I was like, I'm not working like this anymore. And I stopped working overtime. I at that point, I had 750,000 or so of net worth, but I didn't think I was anything special. I still don't. I think I'm just an average everyday person, but I was able to compound that 750, and that's what did it. Some of these people that have 3 kids like I do now, and I look at what I pay in daycare and all of our expenses, I couldn't do this, if I started at age 30. There'd be no way. The only way I did it was from 18 to 32, saving and buying those rental houses and contributing to my 401k. Because now our expenses, they still they stress us out. My wife and I just sat down and went through the finances, and summer is very stressful for us because we have summer care. We have a 10-year-old, we have a 7-year-old, and we have a 4-year-old. So in the summer, we've got all the kids' activities. We've got the summer sitter that drives them around, and my other son goes to preschool. So our daycare expenses are, close to $2,000, $3,000 a month. And that hurts when you're trying to live on $1,500 a month, or $1,500 a week. I'm sorry, that it gets very challenging. But, we do have a savings that we can pull out of. And I always try to keep a ton of cash around just in case.
So where do you go from here? Are you trying to target a certain net worth, or have that passive income built up from the rentals, or what's the plan?
Well, I've got a couple thoughts. I'm going to keep hitting it hard till I hit 5 million. I won't really feel too accomplished, till I hit maybe 10. I'm going to work until we hit 5 million. At least my wife will quit working when we hit 5 million. I may quit work and do something I like more. Like, I kind of want to go run heavy equipment, be a heavy equipment operator. That's something that I enjoy. I've thought about going and doing, coaching people on personal finance. I don't think I have the education to go be a financial advisor. So that probably is out. But I love helping people. I helped 3 or 4 of my older friends that are in their 60s, discover Vanguard and kind of help them allocate things. But my goal is to get to 5 million and hopefully leave my kids. If something happens to me, I want to know that my family's taken care of and leave my kids a nice inheritance. But, I've got that set up in a trust right now, and it's probably going to stay that way. I don't buy new cars. I'm not going to have my kids go spend my money on new cars when I'm gone. I think of that money as a resource, and I don't want it wasted.
Do you carry life insurance?
Yeah, I've got 750,000 on myself. My wife has 500,000 on herself. I've thought about upping it to $1 million. I figure I will be financially independent probably right now, or when I hit 3 million, I'll feel better about it. But I really don't feel like I'm to my goal until I hit 5 million, and that would just mean at the 4% rule, I'd have 100,000 for myself and 100,000 for my wife per year.
Brandon, do you think that needle continues to move as you start hitting those goals, or do you really think, hey, I hit that 5, I won't be stressed out with expenses anymore. $10,000 here, $10,000 there won't bother me anymore?
No, $10,000 is a big number to me. Right now, there's a UTV I want to buy, and it's like $15,000, and I have the money, no problem. I could go do it, but in my mind, I'm going, that money won't compound. That's adding resistance to my goal. That's like swimming upriver, and I like spending money on experiences. If I go on vacation, I try to not put myself in a bad situation. And what I mean by that is I'm not going to go to Hawaii and put myself on a resort that's super nice with all of these expensive things around me to buy. I just feel out of place in those type of places. So, like last year we went to Colorado, spent, $3,500 in the week. We drove there. That bothered me a little bit, just the amount of money that was going out. But at the end of it, I just looked at how much fun we had, and I would do it all over again. But I do get bothered with when I start seeing thousands of dollars go out very quickly. No matter if it's 1,000 or 10, it bothers me a little bit.
What is that number that doesn't bother you? Is 100, 200?
I can donate $100 to a charity or to a friend, and that doesn't bother me. No, $100, anything less than, I would say, 500. I don't think too much about. But that being said, I'll do it for other people, but for myself, I won't pay full price for anything. If I want a pair of shoes, my neighbor, she's a physical therapist. She'll get me a discount on my running shoes. My shirts or my clothing, I don't spend hardly anything on clothing. I do a lot of speaking after my accident, and I speak for a lot of different companies. So they'll give me some nice golf shirts, and they might have their company logo on them, but I don't care. I speak about safety on electrical safety and safety in general. So a lot of these companies will give me clothing, and I wear a lot of their jeans. They're nice looking clothes. You can't tell that they're work clothes, but if I have to go buy a pair of jeans, it's probably a pair of Wranglers at Walmart for $20. I hate spending money on things like that.
So it was an electrical accident that you mentioned, Brandon?
Yeah, I got pretty injured at work, and one of the first questions a lot of the guys at work ask me, did you get this big settlement and that's where you got your money? But I got $30,000 from my accident.
Wow. So as you were talking about that, you said you kind of came to a realization that you weren't going to work as much, right? You had this young baby, you had this kind of maybe this life flashing moment. As you look back now and how much you've worked and how much overtime you worked and going so strong at, working 7 to 4 or 5, whatever you said, and then working overtime and working on these houses, do you regret that extra time that you put in and how much you worked back then, or being where you're at now, do you consider it all worth it?
No, I think it was definitely worth it, because now I look at it as I'm buying my time back. I don't have the energy that I had from 18 to 32, and after work, I focus on my kids and my family. I work 8 hours a day, but I'm not even interested in overtime. I mean, I'll do it if they absolutely need me, but I'm not raising my hand asking for it. I look at my net worth, and it went up, I think, 440,000 last year. So my overtime it doesn't really register that I know I'm wasting my time working at overtime. I need a job to provide health insurance, to continue to contribute to my 401k, and continue to build my net worth, but I don't need to be at work every second to continue to get to my goal of 5 million. Family time is more important to me. But I'm very grateful that I did that from 18 to 32, and I'm going to try to instill that in my children, because I feel like if you do the work at the beginning, you have a lot easier life later on. When I was growing up, my parents, there was a lot of stress about money, and I heard a lot of fights about money, and I just remember thinking, when I'm an adult, I'm not going to have these worries. I'm going to do things differently. And I didn't know what that was going to be until later on in life. But I think everyone needs a mentor, someone to show them the ropes, someone to help them. And my grandpa was pretty successful. He helped me a lot. And he was very frugal, but he would go buy a new Cadillac every 3 years because that was something he liked. But he would pay cash for it. And I remember going with him and watching him write out one of those checks. And I just thought to myself, this is how you should do it. And he could do anything he wanted to do, but he chose to live a pretty frugal life other than his new Cadillac. But I learned a lot of lessons from him.
How old are you, Brandon?
I'm 42.
So any regrets in how you've done it so far?
No, I think if I could go back in time, I think I would have started at Vanguard at the beginning. I'm not sure if I ran the numbers, the houses or the 401k, which one would have been better. I think it would have been a wash. If I could go back, I probably would have tried to put more in my 401k. I just put on my 401k because I knew you should. I wish I would have done it till it hurt, till it really hurt. And I didn't do that. I put some in, and my pension helped boost that to where it probably should have been, but I could have put a lot more in. And I think I could honestly, and I tell this to all the young people that I work with, if I could go back and do it over again, I think I could have double what I have right now.
Why? Just because it would have started compounding faster?
Well, I would have worked 2 jobs, and I would have maxed out my 401k, whatever it took, from as early on as I could. I mean, I was putting in $3, but I should have been putting in until it hurt when I was young. And I'm going to make sure that my kids know that when they get done with college, I want them, when they get their first job, that's going to be, you're going to max out your 401k. I mean, obviously I can't force them, but I'm going to strongly suggest and show them on paper that the second you get a real job, you need to live very, very frugally. I'm a huge fan of Toyotas. My kids are going to have a Toyota Corolla, and I'm hoping that they will, keep their expenses very low and make maxing out that 401k a priority as early as possible. I think that was the key for me.
Yeah, so let me just flip to the allocation real quick. And sorry if I missed this. How many units now do you have on the real estate side?
I have the 4-plex and 4 houses. Everything's paid for except one house. I owe $82,000 on one of the houses. I have enough cash right now. I could pay it off, but I'm a huge fan of Warren Buffett. And, when I listen to him talk about, being Fort Knox and having, obviously I'm never going to have billions of dollars sitting on the sidelines like he does, but I like to make sure that I have enough cash that I can get myself out of any scenario possible.
And on that real estate, what's your total cash flow after the payments that you do have and any expenses, taxes, insurance? What are you netting a month?
$5,092.
Not that anybody's counting. That's a lot. $60,000 a year. You ever think about walking away from the W-2?
No, I separate that money. So only thing I've ever bought with my rental money is I bought a battery drill and an impact, and then I pay for half of my 529 accounts. Right now, we put in about $800 a month for 529s, and I pay $400, and my rental account pays $400.
Got it. Well, let me just ask you a couple rapid fire questions here, and then we'll end with some last words. So what's the most expensive car you've ever purchased?
I was not very smart one time, and I always wanted my wife to have a nice car, and I bought her a $34,500 used Buick Enclave. We got rid of it 3 years later, and we lost $18,000, and I was like, I am never doing that again.
Okay, most expensive meal out that you've personally paid for?
For our anniversary last year, we went to dinner and got some drinks. I think it was $140.
Okay, most expensive vacation?
I would say Mexico. Maybe we spent $5,000.
Okay, most expensive non-car, non-house purchase? Maybe that ATV, or most expensive item, not a car, not a house?
Probably a basketball hoop for my daughter. It was $1,600.
Okay, what's worth the money to you and what's not worth the money?
I think experiences are worth the money. You know, I love taking my kids on experiences, vacations. You know, I pay for club sports for my kids to make sure that they have the most opportunities. What's not worth the money to me is fancy cars, flashy anything. You know, I'm a big Toyota fan. I don't think I'll ever drive anything except a Toyota again. I want the new Toyota Tundra, but I just can't spend that kind of money yet. You know, anything that depreciates in value. That was one of the biggest things that I learned from Rich Dad, Poor Dad, was the difference between an asset and a liability. And once I determined what an asset was and what a liability was, that really helped me decide where I needed to put my money. And that was a big help for me.
Yeah, makes sense. So final words here, Brandon. If someone asks you for advice, I mean, what's the short and sweet of it? What do you say? How were you able to do this?
I think you need to start young. I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever received was live like a broke college student for 10 years. After that, it won't matter. When someone gave me that advice, I really didn't understand what he was saying until it was 10 years later, and I thought about it, but it always stuck with me because it was someone that I really had a lot of respect for. Stay out of debt. I think, you know, I paid my mortgage off, and, you know, I hear a lot of people say, well, it's low interest and all of this, but, you know, if you have to write a check out for the full amount of something, it's much harder to do that or to part with those funds than it is to just sign up for a monthly payment. If you just think about things as it's only so many dollars a month, you way overspend, or at least I do. So I've always tried to make sure that if I don't have the money for something, I don't buy it. I haven't had a car payment in 15 years, but I don't have fancy cars. You know, I drove the same truck for 18 years. I had a bungee cord holding my car fender on for a while, and I could have easily went and bought a new car, but I just wanted to drive those into the ground. I think starting young and living like a broke college student was key for me. In Vanguard, I don't think, you know, anyone looks out for the investor like Vanguard does. I'm a huge in recommending Vanguard to any person that I can. I would say most of my assets are in VTSAX, or the total stock market index. And that's, if I could go back in time, that's what I would tell people is, you know, Vanguard, VTSAX. I read the Simple Path to Wealth, and that pretty much laid out what I had done for the last 15 years. I was doing everything that guy said. I just didn't know it or write the book.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing your story, Brandon. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. So net worth of 2.5 as an electrician. Brandon, thanks for sharing your story. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with Clark Sheffield and Chase Mattinson. For more stories, investment opportunities, and information, check out our website at millionairesunveiled.com. See you next time when you'll hear from another everyday millionaire.